From my side, just a few practical things, really. So you might know you'll find refreshments throughout the day over there. You can always enter the rooftop using the lift or the stairs. There's Wi-Fi. So over there at the bar, you find the password and everything. So please feel free to use it. We will live stream the session at 11:30. Oops. And sorry. And please make sure that you register for the 5 workshops that we're going to have today. You can do this whenever, in the breaks preferably. And we have a maximum capacity of 20 people for every workshop, but don't worry, the workshop is full. The workshop is going to be repeated tomorrow, so you can sign up tomorrow as well. If you have any questions, you can always ask me or Lucy or Igor over there. And I think that's it already. So please welcome with me Camilla Grudova and Helen Oyeyemi.
Good morning, everybody. How are you feeling this morning? Chirpy? I might be too close to that. Okay, so I'm going to introduce Camilla to you with her official bio, but also I wrote something like an appreciation piece to give you a sense of why I'm so excited that Camilla's here, and just a kind of reader's impression of her work for me. But I'll start with the official facts, which is that Camilla is the author of the critically acclaimed The Doll's Alphabet, Children of Paradise, which was longlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction, and The Coiled Serpent, which was longlisted for the Dylan Thomas Prize. She was named one of Granta's best young British novelists in 2023, and a Frank O'Connor Fellow in 2024. Her work has appeared in The White Review, Granta, The Stinging Fly, and The Daily Telegraph. She studied art history at McGill University, Montreal. So this is my impression of Camilla's work. Please don't get angry, Camilla. Many, many springtimes ago, in an otherwise lovely ground floor flat in Budapest, I outlived a host of pantry moths that somehow made their homes in my jars of tea leaves, oats, and other grains. For a few days, it seemed as if those moths would never stop bursting out of every container I opened, so it still feels like a surprise to have outlived them. It took me some time to understand what these creatures even were, but I read up on them in between bouts of muesli disposal and learned that pantry moths don't have any of the anatomical equipment needed to eat and digest sustenance. This changed my view of the terms of our cohabitation. I saw the moths as beings designed to last long enough to reproduce, and that's it. But they wanted more. Who wouldn't? The moths began to embody the appetite I'd almost completely lost thanks to their presence. They zoomed around the kitchen as if they were drunk on air or mad with hunger for the morsels they'd hatched amongst but couldn't consume. To me, this was nothing short of a plague of moths, but to the moths themselves, they might have actually been having something like a ball. It seems to me that Camilla Grudova's utterly beguiling prose style draws on the dialects spoken in those regions of human experience that overlap with the decadent passions of the pantry moth. This is prose that can have an almost anthropological quality to it. There's an observation of rituals that are turned to when all the advantages that human lifespan so often lacks, time, space, comprehension, is most intensely felt. The unexpected choice, and a Grudova description can always be relied on for an unexpected choice, is to send words sauntering into the caverns formed by our sense of lack. As for the extraordinary conditions those words create when they arrive, for me, a Grudova story is a box seat view of impressions that stir at the back of the mind. You're draped in velvet and dripping with stolen gems, and your shadow is seated beside you in an identical outfit. Both of you are sipping extra potent cocktails with a secret ingredient that your shadow knows but will not divulge. and the performance below has as many hues as a sunset. Everything from threepenny operatic to Offenbach operatic. You're finally having the time of your life, and so is your shadow. I applaud this and throw roses.
Thank you so much, Helen. So I'm going to read from a story called Mr. Elephant, and this one is basically T.S. Eliot fan fiction, because I went to Margate to kind of see where he wrote The Wasteland and wrote a few stories about it. And just like I love reading like biographies of poets. I find them like in general quite like difficult, annoying people, but once they're dead and there's a biography, they're quite fun to encounter. In Margate, there are many antique shops. That's why I moved here, not for the sea, which a few have said would be good for my health. Crockery, pots, cups, vases, plates. I live in a hotel with low ceilings and carpeted floors that faces the sea directly. The sea is a noisome neighbor. It crumples tissues and snores and smells of sardines, but I just need to get hold of a cutlet or chops out the window to have them salted. I keep crockery all along the walls of every room, white and blue only, like misshapen or flattened globes. I keep all my things in crockery, tea in a china jar marked tea, needles in a cream jug, a roll of toilet paper in a teapot on top of the toilet, a soup tureen full of socks, my makeup in sugar bowls, violet, yellow, green, blue, depending on my mood, like one of those rings one buys at fairs. All the crockery chatters like teeth when I walk and dance about too. When those above or below do, my rooms become the building's mouth. I like the noise. It competes with the noise of the sea. The sea collects crockery too. We have that in common, but she crunches it up like saltine crackers, then animates the little bits. I have a pot of horse glue for putting mine back together when they crack. I don't like fish, tentacles, mollusks, seaweed. I like sausages, liver, chops, marrow, and cutlets. I don't like jelly, particularly with things floating in it, like a still chunk of sea. Once I thought of filling the sea with gelatin powder to stop its constant noise, to hire ships filled with gelatin powder. There would be enough gelatin powder packets, enough pigs in the world, I think. I like meat and tea. For example, chops, tea, liver, tea, marrow bones, and tea. Sometimes I make a cup of broth or tea, and having forgotten which it is, do not know until I taste it. There are many butcher shops in Margate, too. The antique and butcher shops keep me well. I have to go out for more crockery as often as I go out for meat. I can't explain why I like blue and white crockery, but brown food. The carpets don't match the crockery. The carpets are cream and pink, like flattened squares of raw meat. Twice a week, a woman comes to give me ballroom dancing lessons. She wears a wig that wiggles slightly as we dance. Interestingly, she is not bald underneath, but has very fine blonde hair. I suppose she hides it because such hair attracts seedy men, but her wig has a false smell I find unpleasant, like a plastic bowl. I found a well-preserved grey wig in an antique shop, made out of natural materials, human or mohair, but she was offended at the suggestion she wear it, and it now sits on one of my teapots. I once said to her, "Lance my cyst, will you?" holding her a sewing needle that I had heated on the stove. She would not oblige, and I understood. The smell of my burst cyst was intolerable, like sour, dirty feet and something desperately spoiled. They were on my fingers, neck, torso, and buttocks. I wanted her to lance the large one on my neck, which was planted uncomfortably close to my Adam's apple. I did it myself, looking in the bathroom mirror. The mirror I had was too filthy, so I put a new mirror in front of it, one on top of the other. The oldest one hangs. I haven't seen it for ages, and there are two perched on the sink. I don't want to throw away or irritate mirrors for what they have seen and absorbed, but the surface of them is cracked and covered in soap suds and the soft-boiled egg-like excretions from my cysts. The mirrors aren't as troublesome or as mysterious as the grandfather clock. The grandfather clock, teeth. I have opened the grandfather clock up, and there are no teeth to be found, but they arrive on the hour when it chimes, all over the floor and underneath the clock's legs, like a bloodless mouth that has been hit inside, for the teeth are always dry like museum pieces. Once, just once, there was a long, slightly curved tooth among the human ones, which resembled a small rhinoceros horn. Along the corners of wood, along the gears of the clock, there are no teeth. I've looked. I've examined it like a dentist would, yet they still arrive on the hour. I inherited the grandfather clock from an aunt, and it's very old, from when grandfather clocks were first made, I believe, one of the first. I put all the teeth in vases. I have 3 filled now. They come in such abundance. They have a very mild odor, and when it becomes too much, I'll empty the vases into the sea. Crockery, crockery. Thank you. Oh, that one's over there.
Thank you, Camilla.
Thank you.
Okay, my first question will start kind of calmly. How would you describe your writing to somebody who hasn't read it yet? So when you meet a stranger and they're like, "Oh, you're a writer. What kind of things do you write?"
Well, I had that experience recently when I tried to go on online dating, and I was like, so my work is a little gross and dark, but I'm not like that as a person.
Oh.
So that's my kind of elevator pitch to people.
And are you really not like that as a person, or? Okay. Okay. Next question.
But I think maybe the grossness is like, I feel like that's been like thrust upon me, the idea of grossness. So then I just feel like I've had to like wear it because it is like an egg that someone's thrown on me.
I see.
So I have to be like, there's a egg on my shoulder that's been thrown there. So that.
It does feel to me as if there's a kind of relationship with the grotesque. I wouldn't call it great, but I wondered if that was part of your art history background, where you give us these stories where we watch beauty being born almost out of its antithesis. So you kind of create these contrasts. And is that because of art history, or is that just a general way of viewing the world?
I think definitely. Yeah, I think like most of my kind of, sorry, too much coffee. See, I'm not gross as a person, so it's kind of burps into the microphone. I think, yeah, definitely like my art history background is like the kind of basis of my creative writing. Like I feel like a very visual writer. And then I think, too, just with like in our history class, for example, we would have to write descriptions of paintings without the person like being able to see it, so like in essays, and like sometimes you could put like a crappy black and white photo of the painting like in your essay, but that wouldn't really give the experience, so you really had to learn how to just give a description of what was in it before you give any sort of analysis of like what's happening or the meaning behind it. And so that like really highly influenced my writing. And then too, yeah, I think definitely like kind of painters like Bosch, who I really love, who just does these kind of vile but wonderful paintings, are really interesting to look at. And like that's kind of what I want to do, is just put like a vision in someone's head, like a little mini painting.
So do you think there's something about the act of observation in some way, that when you get really intricate, that things become like just the texture of things becomes slightly, I don't know, slimy in some way, or just that it changes, like the beauty becomes more complicated, like the closer you look, and that's where the grotesque effect comes from sometimes? Yeah,
I think like the highly detailed, and yeah, just the fact that, yeah, with paintings, like a Bosch, it is so beautiful at the same time, even though there's like, you know, someone coming out of someone's bum in like a bubble or something.
Yeah,
but
it's birth. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that like that he's so good on a painterly level, and that's something I really admire too. And so I want to be like good on a sentence level, but at the same time like showing something grotesque. And I guess I think too that like we just don't talk about kind of wastage or like grossness enough. Like, you know, everyone talks about violence and we see so much violence, but then as soon as you show like an unflushed toilet, like people freak out. And I think it has to do with the kind of like hiding from that aspect of life, because we are like the most wasteful species. And yeah, and I think when people think I'm being like unnecessarily grotesque, then I'm like, well, there's things like, you know, Lake Windermere is full of weird algae from like human urine, or like all the rivers in England were like infected with like raw sewage. And I'm like, well, we kind of need to talk about this because, you know, now these rivers are just filled with human filth, yet we pretend it doesn't exist.
My mind went blank for a second. Okay, just thinking about maybe it's not the existence of these things that disturb us, but the disclosure of the existence, right?
Exactly,
But
yeah.
I also feel like this is linked slightly to a sort of aesthetic turbulence that I think is part of the most delightful effect of your work, where you have this kind of graphic maximalism, right? Like, so you're just kind of like, here is the unflushed toilet, but then sometimes you kind of tunnel into almost an intimacy or confidentiality, and I feel like I'm being told secrets. And so I wondered which of those comes more natural to you, and comes more naturally to you, like the maximalism or the kind of like stripped down, you know, come into the corner and I will tell you the secrets of your subconscious kind of vibe.
I think the kind of secrets just kind of form naturally out of the maximum. Like maybe, you know, it's like building a big kind of house full of lots of things, and then so there'll just be like corners of dust in the house that just form naturally out of that structure. So I don't think I consciously have that intimacy, but it's just created by the visions I try and create.
So the intimacy is just there. I was wondering which you feel that you need to work at, like what is the work of the story for you? Like when you feel like you're drawing something out, what element is the thing that you're drawing out?
Probably just like a very distinct image. Like if I can like form a kind of distinct image and then like put it in someone else's head, then I feel like that's kind of like my goal in life. And it's almost like kind of being like I worked for quite a while as a film projectionist, and so I kind of like to be like a projectionist, but then like the cinemas are like everyone's brains, and so it's like slightly invasive as well. And also my like goal would be like if I could enter someone's like dream world, which is like the ultimate invasion. And there's something of like control of it too, of like having a very controlled image and then passing it on to someone else in the same way that, a painter would or a film director would. So I kind of see myself as like a painter in a way, even though I like to use words, and that's like the format I'm like most comfortable in.
Is this image for projection about making the reader see what you see, or about creating an image specifically for the reader? So it's kind of like, let's see this thing together. Yeah,
I think see this thing together. I try to make it like as distinct as possible, but then you can never know how someone else sees something or get into their brain. So maybe it's an attempt. Maybe it's like an attempt at a kind of visual intimacy with someone else, and that I can create this image, but you have to use the tools of your own brain and memories to then help form it. So like they're doing a bit of work as well.
They should.
Yeah.
So this kind of links to my next question, which was about moving from the short story form to the novel form. I wondered if it was a sort of love of cinema that made you think, okay, I need to write a novel about this, and what were the rewarding aspects of like the change in form?
Well, I definitely feel more naturally drawn to short stories. I think every writer kind of will be one or the other, even though they can do both like fine or brilliantly. There's just one that's a bit more precious, or more of the stories they want to tell come out in that form. So I feel like more so than novels, ideas I have will come out as a short story, and that will just be, that's the amount. It's almost like if you're baking, that's the amount of like dough I have, or that story, and you can't like overstretch it or also condense it. Like, you know, when you put like too much dough in a gingerbread man and it just like poofs up into something that no longer looks like a gingerbread man. Yes. That's like if you like, try and put a novel idea into a short story. And so idea I had of the cinema, which was based off of my time working in a cinema, that just came naturally as a novel, which I wasn't happy about, because I find short stories much funner to write. Or I think there's more like weight on the novel as well, especially like in the UK, they're kind of like obsessed with the novel as a form, and it kind of dominates over all others. So I think there's more conservatism in it, whereas with short stories, they're like, well, we don't care about short stories. We'll maybe let you publish one, but like it doesn't matter what they're like, because we don't have all these like standards and kind of rules around it that maybe people have for the novel. I don't know, maybe it's like something related to like a decaying empire or something, because I always think of like how like France and England like especially have this like obsession with the novel as a form to like tell their story.
I hadn't thought about it that way, but maybe it's just like the fish not sensing the water very well. I'm just novels. Wait, I had a question that was that as you were speaking, it came up while you were talking about that. Oh, this was it. So this sense of the novel as a conservative form, was there something that you were working against, that you felt, or that you felt like specifically like pinning you in when you were writing Children of Paradise?
Yeah, it definitely felt like maybe something pinning me in.
And how did you burst out?
I think I tried just through like I kind of framed the novel around like different films, and so every chapter had to allude to that film in some way. Mm-hmm. And I think that was kind of like, I really love Georges Perec and that kind of Oulipo way of like restricting yourself. And so I feel maybe because a novel, because it's longer, it could just feel like this, but it's nice to have a constraint or like a corset that kind of fits around the idea, where like a short story can just kind of be like that, because it's not taking up that much space in its like splatter.
So you can find the freedom within the restraint, like being what's the Hamlet line about having a nutshell, living in a nutshell, and being the king of infinite space.
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
That was another thing I wanted to ask you about, the epigram that you opened the Coiled Serpent with, like jumping back to your most recent short story collection, The Coiled Serpent. You have the most striking epigram, "I shall rage on raw meats," from Mayakovsky. Can you tell me about that and its relationship to the text?
It's quite a meaty book. Mayakovsky, along with like T.S. Eliot, were kind of the like phantoms in the book. I think because I was reading biographies of them both, and I became quite obsessed with Mayakovsky because he's this quite a visually striking man. And so that immediately like attracted me. And then just like reading about like how he would dress in kind of mustard yellow suits, like he was quite a flamboyant dresser, and I was like, well, I can't get that sense from these old black and white photos, but I was like quite fascinated by him as a person. And then that quote kind of came to me during a weird period too, where I was trying to get into different mindsets of different people that maybe I wouldn't understand or have anything in common with. So like one kind of, being Canadian, one kind of difficult person we have to deal with as one of our celebrities is Jordan Peterson, who writes the kind of rules for life books and stuff. And he is on like a quack diet that his daughter invented, which is like only meat. And so I decided, it was like, I think during lockdown, I was like, well, I'm going to experiment and try going on the only meat diet. So when I wrote a lot of this book, I was like just eating meat. So like liver, steak, which was really interesting, like to see like what it did to my body, or like, my sweat started to smell very meaty. So that was my kind of experiment and like consciousness while I was writing this book. And then, the Mayakovsky quote, like things just kind of fall into place like that. Like I was reading about him and stuff, and then I found that quote in his biography or something. I was like, oh, that's perfect.
So it became a kind of mission statement in a way.
Yes.
Oh, huh. I thought it might be something about rage, but it was more about meats.
Yes.
So that's good to know.
And I'm almost vegetarian now, not quite, but almost. Just after that experience, I think I got enough like meat for life almost. But then I also, like when I was younger, I suffered from anemia, and I would like faint a lot, and I had gone vegetarian at quite a young age. Kind of growing up in the 90s, it's because of the film Babe. I think a lot of like our generation went veggie because of that. And then so I was vegetarian from like, 11, 12 to like mid-20s, and then tried to eat meat again. And then I'm always like kind of changing things like that. And then this happened like in my early 30s. I was like, I'm going to try this, and maybe that will cure my anemia and make me like a stronger person, or like feed my brain more.
Maybe. Are you slightly disappointed that you didn't come up with like a Jordan Peterson-like text? Like
Yeah. And maybe
since you tried his diet.
Yeah. But he's definitely wormed his way through. Like the one story, The Meat Eater, which is based off of his diet, I kind of stole stuff from his life as well, which is quite silly. Like he says, in my house there's all this Soviet realist art because I want to remind myself how like terrible communism was. But then at the same time he's like, I hate conceptual art. I hate if someone just puts a cracked teapot in a museum. But I'm like, his relationship to the Soviet art is conceptual, because he's not admiring them for these big burly bodies and like fields of wheat in the painting. He's admiring them in a conceptual way of being like, that's what I don't want life to be like. So I thought that was like really fascinating.
I love that you're out here trolling Jordan Peterson.
Yeah.
Good work. There's something that I don't know why it had to be you, but I specifically wanted to ask you about this. I was reading this Wired article about a tech company called Personify AI, and their aim is to personify everything. So, say if you have, they're starting with dog collars. So you put in a collar on your dog, and then this AI voice like tells you what your dog wants. Right? Like, so the author of the article, Boone Ashworth, says, you talk to your pet, really talk to the collar, and you'll hear a pre-recorded human voice responding to you, creating the illusion that your pet has a human-like personality and the ability to speak English. The collar is just for cats and dogs now, but they hope to get into wearable devices for other critters and eventually humans. And I just wanted to know your thoughts on that. Like, what do you?
I feel like the collar would take on it like a mind of its own, and
Right.
like have its own name and be like, does the dog want that, or does the collar want that?
But I think it would be fun to put it on as a human and just let it speak for me sometimes. Like, can't be bothered. Someone says something to you and you can't be bothered to answer, and then just like
the collar just answers.
Yeah.
And I guess it would be based off of like your body heat and like heart rate and stuff. So maybe if you were like really nervous, then the collar could just
I am nervous.
Yeah, and then you don't have to. But it's interesting too. I wonder if eventually we'd put it on like inanimate objects too. So it'd be like, this glass really wants to be washed. And I'm always interested in like the inner lives of objects.
Me too.
Yeah,
Me too.
I think they all have like history in them. Yeah, it's like in my story I talked about mirrors and how kind of creepy they are. And it's because like if you go into an old house and look into a really old mirror, you just think of like all the other people who have looked in that mirror. There's this really, I forget the name of it. I think it's an Ealing Studio kind of scary stories, and it's like a bunch of little stories in one movie. And there's one where a man buys an old mirror, and then he looks into it and sees this like 17th century man like going about his business and doing things. So I think that happens to us with every object, even though we don't see it. I think technology was definitely a huge theme in this book as well. And maybe it's that I feel like the kind of tech people always have this like kind of slightly occult and spiritual side to it, which I feel like the dog collars and stuff is kind of like beginning of something, and then we'll have these personas on like every object in our house, which is like it's a bit like is it Shintoism, the Japanese?
Everything has an attendant spirit.
Yeah, and so this is like kind of bringing out those spirits in a way, maybe.
Yeah, we're coming back full circle, I guess. Next question. So I was thinking about Salinger, who said, A writer, when he's asked to discuss his craft, ought to get up and call out in a loud voice just the names of the writers he loves. So you don't have to shout if you don't want to, but who are your writers?
Oh, there's so many. Many that you mentioned last night, like Barbara Commons and Leonora Carrington, Angela Carter, like any sort. I love that kind of 20th century kind of British woman's writing and the weirdness of it, and like Muriel Spark, and yeah, just all over the place, definitely. Like a lot of Soviet writers like Mayakovsky or Hanovsky, I probably said that wrong. And yeah, I just try and read lots of everything, or even like I feel like there's writers who maybe doesn't seem to have an influence on me, but are like really important like in my life and kind of how I interpret the world. So someone like Alan Hollinghurst, who I could never write as brilliantly as he does, but he's like really close to my heart, and his work is like really enriches my life. And you know, that must feed its way. I feel like everything you read feeds its way into your work somehow.
Agree.
So it must do. And yeah, I definitely reading is probably like the main like basis of my work, because it is like a conversation with other writers, like not just living but also the dead. So I think it's like kind of channeling something. Like I feel like I have like a really really intimate relationship with T.S. Eliot, and like a lot of the stories in this book are about that and my kind of like relationship with him. So it's kind of parasitic, so maybe I'm like a little
He's like your imaginary friend.
Yes,
It made me think about how Helen Mirren's always talking about Kurt Cobain. She's always like, oh, Kurt Cobain would love GPS. And everyone's like, what? But I think we all have that person where it's like we are really, really close friends with them on some kind of metaphysical level that nobody else understands. But also I don't think it's necessarily about being influenced with writers somehow. Like, so it's interesting to hear you. Because when you say that you don't think it would be obvious that Alan Hollinghurst would be one of your writers, I think it is, because I think that you're both like in the aesthetic realm, so it makes a lot of sense where it's not just the surface is not just the surface. Like there's a lot of semiotic work going on, so it kind of makes sense to me. The next question. Did Suzanne already signal? We just missed. It's time. Oh, can I ask? I just want to ask one more question to Camilla, and then we'll open up to the audience, which is, okay, this is the scenario. You get an email from a publishing company that you've never heard of, and they say, right, you only have 2 more days to correct this manuscript of yours, and you're like, what manuscript? And there's a PDF attached, and the PDF has the title of a book that you've never heard of, but it has your name on it. And then when you go to reply the email, you see that it's dated November 15th, 2034. So this is a future novel. Are you clicking on the PDF to see what you've written?
Yes. I think I would be so curious that I would do it. And I think that
even if it might be a virus.
Oh, it probably would be a virus. Yeah, and then it would destroy whatever work I'm working on in the present. But sometimes I do have dreams, like with the novel I'm working on. It's like I have it like in my head as like a vision. I'm like, wouldn't it be just wonderful if I just woke up and my sleeping self had wrote it and it's just like finished on the nightstand table? Like that's the dream.
Right.
So I would give in to curiosity. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for telling me that. Now, does anyone have any questions for Camilla?
Yeah, thank you so much. I had a question about how do you know when the gross or the grotesque veers into being gratuitous?
I think gratuitousness is great because I think that's just like a mean word for playfulness and having fun. So I think writers should be gratuitous in all manners.
Yeah. Any
You mentioned earlier being influenced by the work of Bosch and also trying to sort of paint with words. So I was just wondering if you could name some other artists who are influential, some visual artists.
Ooh, this is a random one, but the pre-Raphaelites. And I did, in this collection, I do have a pre-Raphaelite story, but I absolutely love them because they had a very particular style where they would like do very bright white paint, and then that would make the other colors they put onto the painting stick out quite vividly. And they were called the pre-Raphaelites because they hated Raphael, which I agree with. I think he's a very overrated painter. So they wanted to go back to the medieval painters, like Giotto, and I really love Giotto as well. And I like the kind of like almost like flat vividness of those medieval paintings, and that really inspires me. Like, I'm not always good at portraying emotions or kind of dialogue and stuff. And you know, and that's kind of connected to like, you know, the Renaissance was like reviving the like Greek realism of like, showing bodies in a kind of anatomically realistic way, or having shadows that we have in life, where I prefer the kind of like flat absurdity of the medieval art. So I think that is, yeah, probably the era I'm like drawn to the most.
So I'm just asking if you could say something about your process with short stories, like where do your ideas come from? Do you keep track of different ideas? Do you work on one story at a time, or do you have like several stories on the go? Do you sort of leave them, come back to them? How many drafts do you go through? That kind of thing. Thanks.
Yeah, it's all kind of random, I guess. Like some stories I've just written in a day and it just comes out. But then I have lots of percolating ideas that I've like written notes on, or I've opened a file, but I'm not like quite ready to write them yet. And I'm a big believer in not like forcing yourself to write something before it's like ready to come out. It's almost like making yourself vomit, and I don't think it's gonna. It's, yeah, where you should just like wait for the digestive process to happen. And yeah, so it's like, I know like I have a story about ferns I've been working on for years, but I'm like, oh, well, I'm just not in the right place in my life to finish that story. And I feel like that with reading as well, where like recently I've really gotten into Henry James, and I never just like, when I was younger, I just was never like attracted to his work, but I think I'm like at the right point in my life where we're ready for each other, and stories are the same way, and you just have to, yeah, let it fester inside of you, and then it will tell you, it will like kind of like burst out like a pimple or something. That's just like, yeah.
Thank you very much for the cool reading. I noticed that you had a lot of fun saying the word crockery, and I wonder what's your connection to humor that comes out of sound?
I feel I'm very not a sound person. Like I have a deeper version to like kind of performance poetry, and I see words as like. I see them mainly as a visual thing. Like I think for crockery, I really like the way it looks on a page. And maybe that does come out excitedly in my voice, but I definitely feel like there's a massive disconnect between like my voice and the sounds I make and like what I'm writing on the page. And I'm a deep believer in like visual rhythm rather than like sound rhythm. And there's very little dialogue in my books because I just don't like dialogue. I would almost like to see my stories as like silent cartoons rather than like two people talking. Yeah. So, and I feel like I'm attracted to words and writing and language on the page because I don't like kind of language as spoken as much as language on the page as a visual thing. Like even like I love Shakespeare, but I really love reading him on the page, almost like a novel or a short story.
Thank you so much. So you open your PDF from your book in 10 years' time. Is there something you're really happy to see on the page, or something that maybe surprises you that you're unhappy to see?
I guess I would just I feel like my writing is like highly influenced by like whatever my obsessions are at the moment. Like with my first book, it was like sewing machines and like tin things, and then this one it was like meat and technology and like semen retention. And so I would be excited to see what future me would be like really obsessed with, and I would like it to be a surprise, because I always like to try and make myself obsessed with something that I don't like, or something that averses me. Like it didn't come out as like a full writing piece, but I decided to become obsessed with the 18th century because I really liked the 19th century and found it fascinating. I was like, oh, the 18th century is like quite boring, so I like made myself love it, and I made myself like love the art of the 18th century. So I think I would just, be like a surprise, probably surprise myself in some way about what I would like in the future. And I guess I would hope it wouldn't be the same things that I like now, and that I've like changed enough and moved on in my interests.
Thanks.
Can you tell us a bit more about your connection to T.S. Eliot and the short story you read?
Weirdly, I feel like he is like the biggest influence on my short story. Like his poems like taught me how to write short stories. There was just something in the shape of them that really, like I almost like read them as short stories. And I don't know, just the tone or like certain phrases he uses that I really love. And I think I just became, because he had such a strange life, like my kind of stories set in Margate were based around, he had this breakdown. I moved to Margate, and he started like putting like green makeup on his face. And he'd never explained why to anyone. So like Virginia Woolf and all of those people were like, what the F? Like, why does he have like green face paint on? And he just never explained it to anyone. And I think I'm like attracted to his like spirituality as well. I think I was like trying to become more spiritual. Like I have like a deep aversion to like the occult and the New Age, which I think like comes through in the Coiled Serpent quite a lot, because I feel like that's kind of connected to like tech bros and their kind of vision of the world. Like they always get into like really New Age spiritualities. But I was like quite fascinated by T.S. Eliot's like conversion to Anglicism. So I was kind of trying to go into that path as well. And I think too, just because, I'm a North American who moved to the UK, and I'm quite a like Anglophile and Scottish-phile. So I feel that connected me to him as well, like trying to find my voice as like a North American person living in the UK. He was kind of one of my role models for that.
I think that's the end of the session. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.